news. Tickets for the Conference on Religious Trauma, Court 2023, are now available. Also, if you're interested in an ad-free version of the Divorcing Religion podcast, come join me over on Patreon. Links for both are in the show notes. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. Before we get started today, I want to warn you that some of our content might be triggering. My guest and I will be discussing her recent book of fiction that depicts sexual coercion between an adult male and an adolescent girl and the consequences that ensue. Joining me today is author Jessica Barksdale. Jessica is not joining me because of personal religious trauma, but because the subject of her 16th and most recent novel, What the Moon Did, resonates with stories I've heard from clients in my counseling practice. Themes in this book include adolescence, vulnerability, coercion, and family secrets, with the underlying message summarized this way. No matter how we try to hide our pasts, the truth finds its way to the surface, sometimes in devastating ways. One of her reviewers summed it up this way: What the Moon Did is a masterful telling of a family's hidden tragedy and the unhealed wounds that long ripple throughout their lives. Welcome, Jessica Barksdale.
Thank you, Janice. Nice to be here.
It's so nice to have you. And we're not that far apart. You're just across the border from me. I'm in Canada.
Just a ferry away.
In the USA. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I was so interested when I saw on one of my social media sites, I'm on tons of them, someone brought up your book. And they were talking about it, and they were talking about the theme of the book. And I thought right away I wanted to connect with you because folks that I work with might be able to relate.
Great. That's the beauty of social media. You can get the word out. So many different people are interested in all the topics that you just listed, secrets especially, I think.
Oh, yeah. And we're so in families discouraged from sharing secrets. That is exactly how it goes in a lot of times. I wonder if you would share with us a little bit about your own religious or non-religious background.
I was brought up, it was a Christian-ish household in the sense that there was a God somewhere and Jesus was around, and we did all the Jesus holidays because that's what people did. Mm-hmm. I had Jewish friends, though, in the town I grew up with, and I was really fortunate to be able to go over on Friday nights for Seder dinners and experience Hanukkah. So I knew that there was another kind of way of believing. I also managed to have in my very sort of upper middle class town that was very racially segregated, some Asian friends. So I also gravitated toward people who were different. So I knew that there were different ideas. And my mom did go through a spell, and I actually have used this detail often. She brought us to just about any church just to try. I think she felt an emptiness and often tried to fill it with religion. And so we ended up going to a fundamentalist Christian church for a while, which was scary and interesting. And then that fell away like all of the others. And no, the interesting thing, my father's family in Denver joined the Mormon Church.
Wow.
And for decades, every Sunday, this nice man came over in his blue car. I remember he had an aqua colored car, and he'd come and talk to my dad. And when my dad died, all of a sudden I opened the door and there were these Mormons with all of this food, canned food, because, you know, they're very much interested in preparing for the tragedies that do befall. Mm-hmm. And they were the nicest people. And it was kind of a shock that they had followed my father for all these years, even though he had left the church. That's about it. I knew that we had to be good more for Santa Claus than I think Jesus.
Yeah. The Mormon piece is really interesting. So did your dad ever discuss
Absolutely not. I don't know why. I just knew that this guy was there. And then later I asked my mother, I said, what was that? And then I did some research, or my sister is very interested in family history. And she found out that they joined. My grandmother and grandfather had briefly joined. And I don't really think they were asking for money, or he was trying to bring my dad back into the fold.
Wow.
And my feeling for, I taught at a community college for 32 years, and I had a number of Mormon students, but I also had a number of Mormon students who I could sense that the Mormon religion was really great if you were sort of okay on the main path. But when I developed a gay and lesbian literature class in 1992, and I had about 5 Brigham Young students who fled Brigham Young, and they were just sitting in my class going, help. So if you weren't on the path, it was difficult. But if you were on the path, people were pretty happy. And if you weren't on the path, people were not very happy, right? But so I don't have a specific feeling. I lived in Oakland many years, and the Mormons opened up the temple grounds for walking and hanging around, and you could visit parts of the temple, and it was always very sort of, let's go to the temple and take a walk, so nothing pulling me.
Yeah, interesting. And you mentioned your mom taking you to a very conservative Christian church, fundamentalist Christian church, and the word you used was scary. That was scary. So tell me a little bit about that.
Here's where I remember being scared. They gave out little comic book kind of things.
Oh, the chick tracts, yeah.
Is that what? Okay, so we did Sunday school, and then we did church. And in Sunday school, we got this, and I remember this one time. And now you remember, I'm a writer, and so even then, I was like becoming a writer. So I opened it, and this kid was with his father in church. It's like a graphic novel, we'd call it today, right? And he was in church, and he was thinking about baseball. And so then the story goes, and then he dies, and then he goes up to the pearly gates, and St. Peter, it must have been, said something like, well, do you remember that day you were in church and you were thinking about baseball? I'm sorry, you can't. I'm like, all the ways my brain went, I was always creating stories all the time. And so I remember feeling that I was doomed.
Oh no.
I have thought too many thoughts. And so I think it sort of tainted a few years. But on the other hand, I still know people from that church. We all grew up in the same area. They all left the church. Nobody's in the church. We just were friends. And they were, when my father died, they opened up that church for a service there, and he never went to the church. So I felt, again, like anything in human life, there can be good and bad things, right? And so both of those groups opened themselves up to us and helped us, and also left us with sort of odd feelings, I think.
Wow.
But that's about it. Then off I went into my, agnostic, now atheist life, and I'm fine.
And did your mom ever find anything that kind of scratched that itch for her?
I don't think so. I think my mom, bridge, maybe.
Yeah, for sure. Community.
Yeah, I mean, being around people with a shared purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she used to like to pretend she believed in God, and I just look at her and she just look away, and we just acknowledge, we just don't. God was never real, really, in our house. It was sort of just something we knew we had to sort of believe in to get by in our culture. You know, in God we trust, etc. But it wasn't a daily thing.
So then, as you're living in the States now and an atheist, do you feel the temperature rising or the temperature changing with the political stuff? Everything has become so jumbled together.
You know, in later years, and I'm not an activist, but I have been shopping here, especially in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll go into a store during Christmas and something like, "Oh, come all ye faithful" will come on, or I'll realize that all the holiday songs they're not secular, they're religious. And I think that if the tables were turned and the very faithful were shopping and all it was Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, I think there would be a great reaction. And it gets on my nerves. It gets on my nerves that God is in government. And, you know, I used to really love the flag of the United States, and it's now been weaponized here. You know, I was a Girl Scout, and we learned how to fold the flag very reverentially. Of course, the flag is a story of colonialism, but it's also a story about religious people who were persecuted religiously, who fled to a country, and then later groups of people managed to kill everybody on the land. You know what I mean? But it did symbolize for me growing up a group of people banding together in a good way. Of course, again, as you know, there's good and bad in everything, right?
Yeah.
So here, the flag is weaponized. It's on as God is weaponized. You know, you're God-fearing, and if you're a good citizen, and if you are God-fearing, you will vote this one way. And if you are a lawless, renegade, anarchist, Antifa person, you vote the other way.
Yes.
And if you happen to be a liberal person who likes the flag, that's kind of weird at this point. So we can't even cherry pick the things that we love from the things that we have and extol them. I would never hang a flag in. And now I do have, for instance, I have had 2 religious experiences in my life that I don't think are religious experiences, but I've had them. I've had them both around the images of the Virgin Mary. One in Mexico City, in front of the Virgen Guadalupe, the beautiful painting of her that was revealed. And I went with my first husband, who was Mexican, and it wasn't Easter, thank God, so we could actually get in and see it. And they have escalators that go in, flat escalators that go in front.
Yes, that's so.
Up the Virgin, and then this way, and then you have to leave.
To keep people moving,
Yeah. So I'm looking up at her, and I just burst into tears for no reason. Just was it art? Was it the idea that all the suffering that I was seeing parents holding their children up? I was seeing people who really believed. The room was filled with feeling. So I think that really affected me. On the other hand, just recently I was in Cinque Terre, Italy, and in Monterosa al Mare, and my friend and I were walking up a hill, and in this creche there was a Pietà, just with Mary and Jesus. The Pietas often have Nicodemus and Mary Magdalene and a whole bunch of, this was just mother and child. And I couldn't have my full experience because there were people, but I had the same feeling, you know? So I think in religion, there are so many important human emotions, mother and child, sacrifice, the cycle of life, that we can't wholesale get rid of because they're part of human experience.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, what has been my solace and what I took up with was mythology. When I was teaching mythology in my community college for 32 years, when I first started, and of course I'd studied mythology, but it just repeating it semester after semester, I'm like, every single myth system has a garden, and there's somebody in the garden. And the person in the garden usually falls out of innocence into experience. And then we never can get back to that experience ever again. And all these people and all these stories are always trying to get back to that beautiful golden age that, you have in Sumerian myth, you have it in Babylonian myth, you have it in Native American myths, you have the same thing. So I started thinking, wow, we are really scared. We are really scared here. This is really scary. We're on a piece of charcoal floating in the middle of God knows what. God knows what. Right? And so we create stories that resonate with, as famous psychologist Jung, these archetypal figures and stories that we go, yes, we understand at a deep emotional level. And then we decide to codify them and make them scripture, and then we end up calcifying that beautiful feeling we have about being on this planet. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty much against it all.
Well, it's what you're saying is it's just dead on, because we do seem to crave certainty, security, order, and acceptance. And so religion ties those up with a bow, and conspiracy theories ties that up with a bow. And so same with cults, right? We want the simple answers to the complex questions. We want
why are we
sure
here?
We're right. Exactly.
An alien is coming soon to take us back.
And some people absolutely believe it and stake their lives on it and build their identities and their entire lives around it. I work with many folks who were missionaries or pastors or priests in the field for decades, their whole life. And they're coming to me in their 60s, if they're lucky in their 60s, and saying, what have I just done? What just happened? If that's not the way, then I have devoted my entire life to something that isn't true. And that can be a super rude awakening for people who are already have been plunged into kind of an existential crisis, as they think, well, if that's not true, what is true? And what does that mean for me down the road?
Being able to live with the question is the answer. Mm-hmm. Where I feel when I realized there was no answer, I'm like, I'll just have to live with the question. And I will never know why we're here.
Right. Yeah. Learning
and that
to
is
sit
scary.
With the discomfort. It is.
Yeah. But it's okay. It's like, why would we know? We don't even know where we came from. I mean, we have ideas. We have little clues in the bones and everything, right? But I think being able to say, I don't need to know. I'm just going to live the life that I have here. And the thing about religion, which is unfortunate, is that it's so much of it is true. The golden rule or karma, or this idea of being a good person. It's human wisdom to know that this is good. So live with the discomfort and live your best life. And you know what? If we're all surprised at the end, yay.
That's right. That's right. Yes, it could be a very good thing. Thanks for sharing some about your background. That gives folks an idea of where you're coming from. I'm curious. So you have written 16 novels. Are they novels? Are they all mainly works of fiction?
I've published traditionally 16 books of fiction, all novels. My first short story collection is coming out in August, which is exciting. So I've worked in the short form a lot, and I've also published 2 books of poetry. So I started as a poet, kind of grappling with these big questions. That I think poetry is one, if for people being confused about things, just finding a good poet and sort of following a poet. Poets are always questing for answers to the questions. And so it was a good outlet, especially for that. And then I've just finished, and I'm so excited about it because it's so fun. I don't know why I wrote it, but I write around in all the genres. I finished a first draft of a cozy mystery.
Ooh.
And it's set in Vancouver, Washington.
All right.
And I had so much fun. So, as long as I'm having fun, whatever comes up, I'll give it a go.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. What's the community size in Vancouver, Washington? How big is your city?
We're at 500,000 here.
Okay.
Vancouver, because it's turned into sort of a Los Angeles kind of city. It absorbed like an amoeba, many smaller communities, so that I'm in Vancouver, Washington proper, but there's, sort of county parts of the city. So it's relatively large.
Yeah. Wow. Well, 500,000 people is nothing to sneeze at.
No,
that's for sure.
I think we're the 4 biggest, Seattle, Spokane, Vancouver, and some other town. I'm not, I was from the Bay. I'm from the Bay Area. I lived there for all my life, but 3 years.
Wow.
So I'm still absorbing facts about Washington.
Okay. So when you grew up and you were talking about some of your growing up experiences, those were from the Bay Area.
Bay Area. Yeah.
Okay.
California.
Yes. Wow. Very interesting. I think you must have had some very different experiences there than I had growing up in a very white Christian waspy bubble in Kelowna, British Columbia, which when I was growing up only had about 60,000 people. Now maybe we have about 150,000, but it was just so kind of insulated. It didn't feel like, I would maybe hear that there were Black people or people of color somewhere else in Canada, but I didn't grow up seeing them. So yeah, and then to be raised in a Christian family that believed the Bible to be true, also just really limited my experiences and my interpretation or misinterpretation of the experiences that I did have.
I grew up, my town is Orinda, where I grew up, and it is on the other side of the Berkeley Hills, and it is only 17,000 people in it. And it was very small, but we were 10 minutes from Berkeley. So I remember my mom taking me to get my ears pierced in 6th grade, and the Hare Krishnas were dancing on the street corner. So I always knew there was something else. And we had Oakland, which had where I lived much of my adult life. So I think that what you described about your, being insulated like that, where I was in a metropolitan area, was nearby.
Yeah. So what do you remember? What kind of reaction or anything your mother might have said to you when, there's the Hare Krishnas?
No, they were just there. We just like, there's the Hare Krishnas. Because it's just. So I was born in 1961. So pretty soon we had, the Summer of Love coming up in the Bay Area. We had hippies. We had drugs. We had a very booming LSD, apparently manufacturing thing going on in Orinda for a while. There were arrests. It was, I had a suede vest with fringe. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yep, you were part of it.
I was, but then we were, hunkered in behind the hill, and we could go out when we felt like it.
Right. Yeah, that sounds like a nice way to do it. Did any of the books that you've written, did any of them relate to religion or mythology, or were those themes woven in besides the poetry books?
I think that my first novel is about a teenage girl who hides a pregnancy and has the baby at home. and there's an absent mother. The only way I could figure out how this could happen is that I had to get rid of the mother before the novel even starts. So there's a figure in mythology, the maiden mother crone, where all women are these three goddesses: the maiden, the mother, and the crone. And so I had to get rid of the mother and really the crone, and then I had to turn the teenage girl into the mother. So I was thinking about that archetype when I was writing that. I don't really per se write. I don't know if I have some right-wing people in my mystery novel, but who are very much on certain lines, cultural lines. But I try to, in conversation and in writing, except for maybe poetry, I try to stay away. I have a poem I just wrote. It just got published. It's called God's Weekend Visit. And I had God come back for a visit to this person, the speaker of the poem. And they have just a really nice little dinner. And I cracked myself up so much when I wrote that. So now and again, I will, but it's just, I'm not that interested in religion, except to look at it from afar and say, wow, because I feel like I've been able to leave it really behind personally.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it feels good.
Good. Yes, I agree. It feels fantastic. Although at first it felt kind of scary and overwhelming because it was all I knew.
Well, and I wasn't even entrenched, but I really consciously made that decision. It was a conscious decision, probably in the mid 90s, to just let it go. It felt, wow, I have a lot of Catholic friends.
Uh-huh.
And the thing about Catholicism is Catholics to me, mostly, who just they seem they're having a good life and they're very connected. And I sort of looked at that a lot and thought, wow, that would be nice. But I just didn't grow up that way. And they did. I mean, I have a friend, her family's from Ireland. I mean, they're Catholic and this is what they believe. But boy, do they go out and party and drink and they're happy and they've got a lot of family. And it's just different from some of the other, like the Mormon kids who were in my classes. It's just different.
Yes, it really is. So now the book, your recent book, What the Moon Did, can you tell us what you'd like us to know about that book or anything that went into writing the book?
This is loosely based on some family lore, different kinds of stories from not only my mother's, but my father's side of the family. And part of it started with the Me Too movement and some of the things my mother, who has dementia, began to tell me about her childhood. And, I think my biggest thought about the world is that until we get rid of sexism in homes, we can't cure all the other isms, right? So that especially girls, children and women suffer in the very place that is the most private and important. And when you come out of a situation where you have been devalued and where you have not been you have not been protected by the people who are supposed to protect you, I think that it can cause ripples in a family that lasts forever. That someone down the line has to dam it up if possible. And so I'm also a nosy person. And even if I don't know the answer, and even if the situation isn't true, I want to figure out how it could have happened. So I started with a revelation that a mother gives a daughter late in her life, well past the time when we she's got dementia. She's old. It's going to be hard to get to the bottom. There's a ticking time. There's a ticking clock here.
Yeah.
And then the daughter wanting to understand her own life and really her mother's life. And then we go back in time and we go forward in time. So it's not a linear telling of the story. And we learn from all the people involved in the story how this secret developed, what were the ramifications of the secret, and how did the secret resolve itself. And I felt compelled to leave this book on a couple of higher notes, some redemption, which is an archetypal story, where we have the hero cycle, and leaving it with some glimmer of hope, and then going back into the past and finding a glimmer where things might have not gone wrong. And then just using the being a child in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, what kinds of structure and rules were in our culture that made people repress.
Mm-hmm.
Why, culture is just like religion. It's a mirror. Religion is a mirror of culture. Culture is a mirror of the, and our culture can do terrible things to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Well, one of the themes or something that happens in the book revolves around coercion, some coercion that takes place, and of course, the young lady. She's an adolescent, early adolescent.
Barely, yeah.
Yes, and so she's has this experience with this older man and isn't quite sure even what it is or what it's all about. And when we grow up in religious homes, one thing we are not taught about is consent. And in fact, we're not encouraged to have boundaries for the most part, because our parents always have to have access to us. And then we're supposed to also be confessing all the time to the pastor or the priest. And so those things, I just think it's interesting for a book when things like this come up around consent. Can you talk about that at all?
When I came of age in the I think this is early 70s, we finally had we called it family life education.
Right.
It wasn't sex education at the time. It was family life.
Mm-hmm.
And the boys were put into one group and the girls were put into another group. I think this is 5th grade, just before girls are going to start getting their periods. And it was a mystery, we didn't have an open culture or society. And so we learned the basics, but then we didn't learn we should have had a class every year, and so then we would learn how to say yes to sex or how to say no to sex, and who should you have sex, could you have sex with, who's an age appropriate sexual partner for you, what to do when someone you don't, so those are the rules that no one gave us any information about. And I think the Me Too movement, which started this story, people came out to say, I was of age. Theoretically, I was a 21-year-old woman, but this older man did this thing to me, and I didn't know how to say no.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't say no, but I didn't know how to say no in a way that he could hear. And I certainly didn't say yes, but I also didn't run out of the room, because my job, my family, everything was wrapped up in me being in this room with this man.
Mm-hmm.
And so I still, now the culture took a turn, right? Where we're looking at everything, and maybe we'll go a little far down the road and come back and find a place where here's a good idea about consent. And here's a good idea and also I think in this book, the character who assaults a young girl is a sociopath. And sociopaths, there are different rules for them because you sometimes don't know what you're dealing with, because they can be so charming. And, so I think it's fraught. I think consent, obviously the age limit is useful.
Yeah.
I mean, at least that gets the law on your side. But even later, even now at my age, if when is this, get away from me? When is that? And if that's not listened to, how do you deal with that? I think I'm more afraid, I'm afraid for girls. I'm afraid for children. Just everybody about the relationship of sex and power and how to say yes or no. And, sometimes it works out great. But sometimes people are wrecked because of these things they didn't know how to say no to.
Right. Yes. And then, of course, how does that person tell their family? And thinking about if this is a young adolescent, not even an older teen, just a very young, how do they talk to their parents about what has happened? And then concerns about reputation, family reputation. What will people think? And people who grow up in fundamentalist religious families, they know that sentence very well. What will people think?
What my grandmother's saying was, what will the neighbors think?
Yes, my parents.
What will the neighbors think? And that's how my mother was raised specifically. And I remember thinking, who cares?
Yeah, same.
Who cares what the neighbors think? What do you think? Or am I not as important as the neighbors?
Yes, that's right.
I'm here in your house. Can you pay attention to me and not worry about them?
Oh, wow.
And I know my mother felt that way. My grandmother had a lot of amazing qualities, but she really was focused on the social order of things.
Yes.
And I believe they did go to church sometimes, but she did it because it was something that one should do.
Right.
Yeah, and one should do this, and one should be a church member, and one should go to the country club, and one should golf, and one should have bridge parties, and these are the things that one does to live a full life in this town that they lived in. So I think the Me Too thing really, and it's still exploding in little bits. And I hope it changes, but it goes back to this idea of if you have sexism in your home, and if you're living in a sexist household where there's a power imbalance between them, and this could be male, it could be any partnership that you have. Okay. If there's an imbalance in some way, a power division, children see that. Children emulate that kind of behavior. And, but, people get so, because there's so many isms, and I do not like to argue because sometimes people will be going off on very obscure isms that are out there that they're fighting. I go, could we just solve sexism first? And then I believe that one will be taken.
The other isms will fall into line.
If we could just fix that one, then maybe all the other isms will be okay. But I have so far have been failing in this quest.
And we have not yet solved all the world's problems.
Not yet.
Did you have a favorite passage or any passage from your book that you'd like to share with us?
I have this one. And this is the one I thought it would be useful to read. So this is a scene where the Mary Jo, who's the main character, has been found out. She did not tell her parents what happened. They discovered because she is pregnant. And she has told them her dad is a doctor. He's done a little exam on her, not a vaginal exam,
Right.
but he's looked at her and he's noted what's happened. And her parents have gone to talk to the man who did it.
Wow.
And this to me, and when they come back, they have a plan. But for me, this, when I was writing this, what I couldn't believe it, because even though I'm writing it, I was so surprised that this is how firmly these parents believe in their culture and their society and in the rules they're living in. And this is what they do to their child. I think an ultimate betrayal. So I just thought I'd read a couple of pages.
Yes.
Finally, after hours and hours, her parents returned home, sent Bobby to bed, and sat Mary Jo down again in her father's office. Thing is, her father said, Mr. Bradfield is very sorry for what happened. Sorry, Mary Jo repeated. Her mother held up a finger, her constant signal to be quiet. He'd worked hard from dawn to dusk at the store and then went to church. He came to the party without eating a bite since morning. Then he drank too much very quickly. Mary Jo stared at her mother, but Virginia would not meet her eye. Instead, she sniffed and continued. He barely remembered the party. When we asked him, he was astounded, then ashamed, horrified. He thought that he'd pulled his wife into their bedroom at their home. He didn't really know where he was or who he was with. He was so confused and, well, he violated you, her father said, his words a slap, but he avoided Mary Jo's gaze as well, his face pale, lips white. He is truly sorry and wishes to make amends. Amends. The word sounded like something from church, something you would do to be forgiven for the worst of sins like murder. And he was a liar, another sin. He hadn't thought she was Betty, his wife. He'd called her Mary Jo by her name. Don't tell anyone about this, Mary Jo, he'd said. He'd been planning it all. He'd been watching her all summer. He touched her. Then he'd done all those things and he'd done them again and again. And now he was lying and ruining her life. And she'd never told anyone. She was as big a liar as he was. They'd blame her for not telling. Mary Jo clenched and unclenched her teeth, the truth in the tiny space between her molars. But if she told, she would be caught in her own lies like a bug, crushed and sucked dry. Are they going to move away? Mary Jo finally asked. At that, her mother gave her a strong look. Why would you ask that? Mary Jo's throat felt thick, as if she were about to cry. Was she? She rubbed her nose. Because of what he did. He did something very wrong, her father said, looking at a spot above her right shoulder. She wished she could lunge forward and pull his face to hers like she used to. Hadn't they played together on the rug in the family room before dinner? He was a pony or a car. She could still feel his face under her palms, prickly with beard. But it's wrong, her father nodded. Aren't you going to call the police? Her father looked down at his hands. He clenched them once, twice. He didn't mean for this to happen. It's wrong. It was, her father nodded. Mary Jo stared at her father, neither his words nor his actions making one bit of sense. All her life, her doctor father, Larry Johnson, had told the God's honest truth, hands on the Bible. But what he was saying now was nothing but a lie. But he held up a hand. The Bradfields have a child of their own, Mary Jo, their little boy, Harry. If we take care of this ourselves, it can all turn out all right.
Wow.
I realize how much God there is in there, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That is so, boy, you just draw the readers right in there. Your descriptions are so good. And my heart just feels so sad for that poor child. The confusion and the conflict between how she knows her dad to be, like this honest, very good person, and then he can't even meet her gaze because he knows that what he is suggesting and what he's refusing to do are unacceptable.
Unacceptable. And it just goes on from there. You know, the lie after lie after weirdness after weirdness. Yeah, and then all the lives, Mary Jo's and the babies, how that unfolds. And it just, and it's not an uncommon story, which is the sad thing. Mm-hmm. It's not an uncommon story. People say, oh, that's terrible. I go, well, it's probably happening right down your street, this kind of thing. And shame, as I know, I'm sure you talk a lot about shame in your work, people feeling ashamed, and we feel shame, and, truth telling is scary, but being vulnerable actually makes you more powerful. And yet people fight against it.
Yeah. Wow. That's the truth. Yeah. But vulnerability is a superpower in some ways, just like authenticity. It can be disarming because we live in such a shallow age of pretend, especially with social media. But so then when we encounter someone who really is being genuine and vulnerable, it's shocking. And I wish it weren't.
Me too. But then we also on social media have the oversharers who are and so, human life is so hard, right? It's like how to find the right note.
Yeah. And oversharing is another theme in the work that I do, similar to what we were talking about before. When someone grows up and they're not allowed to have boundaries, and they're almost forced. It's like a cult of confession all the time. Oh no, I thought about this. Oh no, I did that. Oh no, I read this. And then they leave religion. They don't hold those beliefs anymore, but they do not know what's appropriate sharing in secular society. Pardon me, where people keep more of a distance, and there are some boundaries there. But if you grew up without boundaries, you're just not aware of when to use them.
It's dangerous. People won't understand. Yeah. And I think also people who suffer from certain, conditions, they don't have the ability to even, there is no boundary. And social media, I actually do love I like Facebook. And it's slower, and I think you can find things, but you can also find people curating their lives in ways that you can do on social media that you can't do in reality. You can't always be having the best time of your life.
Right. Yes. That's right. And then that speaks to another issue that comes up in my practice, which is, and this is particularly folks in their 20s and 30s, maybe talk to me about this, but experiencing FOMO.
Oh, FOMO. I was thinking the acronym FOMO. I know, people who have severe cases of FOMO. And it's like, just sit at home and read a book, have a cup of coffee, you're fine.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Well, another reason I was interested in having you on as a guest is because I think that writing is very healing. It can be a tremendous tool. And I encourage a lot of my clients, as they're exploring their grief around the losses they suffered. They suffered losses first because they were members of a very fundamentalist community. So they had a lot of things they weren't allowed to do or participate in. And then they suffer additional losses when they leave. This is what religious trauma syndrome explores. And so when we're thinking about some of our losses, it can feel really hard just to say them out loud. And sometimes I encourage people to consider poetry.
I was just thinking poetry prompts, in a class of poetry prompts are just the way to go, because you can do a list poem, things I miss, poem, things I think it's a Dylan Thomas. This is not the exact quote, but it's like, I hate my chains. I love my chains. We hate them, but they were what were holding us up together. And when they're gone, we miss them. And that can be said of just, a dysfunctional relationship, a bad job. You hated your job and now you don't have it. But if you have grown up in a religious tradition and you suddenly don't have it, I feel the emptiness right now of what that must feel like. And so, yeah, I think poetry, well, we always sort of joke, the biggest audience for poetry is poets. But I also think, because we all buy each other's books. But I think for anyone wanting solace, poetry is the way. It gets right into it. You don't have to read any preamble. Boom, you're in the experience.
Yes, and it's often in bite-sized pieces.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That's why I'm like, why don't more people read poetry? You can open it, read a poem, and go, that was great. I'll come back tomorrow.
Right. That's right. Yeah, and it can get us thinking about topics that we may otherwise be hesitant to explore. So I really appreciate that. Another thing that was helpful for me in my own journey out of religion was Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, and the video series that he did on that. That was shocking. It was revelatory to me. I had no idea, and I was an adult. I had no idea that there were other traditions, religions, all based on mythology that had a virgin birth or a martyred and risen savior.
A rising, falling God.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. Who knew?
It was so shocking and offensive, because I was like, well, it hurt to hear those things because I thought mine was so special and mine was the only truth. And my next thing was, if I had known this, if I had been exposed to this or sought this out on my own at some point when I was earlier, I would not have devoted decades of my life to this fundamentalist belief system that I was in, and I would have raised my children very differently as well. So I'm delighted that you've done so much work around mythology and teaching on it.
You're reminding, gosh, you just sent me. I used The Power of Myth for years just as an intro for students. And one day, it was a night class. It was a 3-hour class. And I had this one student, I knew she'd been homeschooled, but we were talking about something. Might have been Inanna in her garden, picking the tree, her tree, planting her tree. And I was talking about, Adam and Eve and this very story. And later I realized she was weeping. And so I had a break, and I said, are you okay? And she goes, I just what you said. She goes, I just didn't know. I go, are you okay? She goes, yes, but I've been homeschooled for 12 years and my parents are in a church and I didn't know. And and she stuck through that whole class, and she got, we went on to read all sorts of other myths. And I felt like she went from, it was so ironic, she went from innocence to experience. She left the garden right in front of me. But she was so good natured. She was sobbing, but she wasn't angry. And she was just like, appalled, like amazed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I wonder, if part of her was also thinking, well, my parents don't know about this. Surely if they would know about this, then they also would change their mind. But that doesn't happen to everyone. I mean, in its best possible ending, education liberates us and opens our eyes.
And there she was, 17, 18, whatever she was. And she'd gotten, some part of her got out. Right. And I don't know the follow-up, unfortunately, while so many students I'm still in contact, there are just thousands that I don't know the end of that story. Did they make it through? So here's hoping.
Exactly. Well, tell our viewers how they can find you.
Can I put into the chat? Or do you do chat?
You can send me an email, and I'll make sure everything gets into the show notes, because this won't be airing for a couple weeks yet.
Okay, in my SIG line, I have my website.
Oh, very good. Yes.
Where I have a contact if you're interested in. I do teach still. I'm teaching for UCLA Extension. I teach novel writing, and I also go to workshops here and there. So if I haven't broken into the Canadian market yet,
we'll do our best.
And so I'm around. I'm on social media too, if people are interested, so I can send you that information. And this is the cover of What the Moon Did. You see the suburban home.
It's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the storm clouds. I said, it looks too happy. Let's put it. And then he's Flexible Press, this really great guy. And Bill Burleson. And he goes, let's put the cover up on your Facebook and see what people
Good
pick.
idea.
And everyone said, there's got to be a moon. What the moon did, there has to be a moon. So, and this is available on Amazon if people are interested.
Wonderful. Yeah. I really like the cover. It's very moody. It makes me want to dig in and go, what's
going on in that house?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, well, thank you so much for being my guest.
It was my
today.
pleasure, Janice. Really interesting discussion. Didn't know I was so interested in all of this.
Wow, how wonderful. Thank you, Jessica Barksdale, for joining us today. And thank you for joining us today. And I would like to remind you, tickets are now on sale for the Conference on Religious Trauma that's taking place in October online. And you can always come to my website if you want to drop me a line at divorcing-religion.com. Thanks, everybody, and we'll see you again soon.